Worms who are loving death and despising life. Their chief is like a dog, a man of boasting without courage, bringing to an end Pedesha, whom I caused to take grain in ships to keep alive that land of Hatti. Pharaoh Merneptah, around 1200 BC, dramatically speaks of a coalition of sea peoples attacking Egypt from the west, the same groups who ravaged the region of Pedesha in Anatolia, which he tried to save. This is the beginning of the Bronze Age collapse. These people did not come out of nowhere to destroy the world, however, as the pharaohs would have us believe, but it will be proven that they were, at least initially, part of an organized Mycenaean expeditionary force with specific strategic objectives aiming to take full control of the eastern trade routes to keep the copper flowing into the Aegean. Along those lines, we will support their Aegean origin instead of the more commonly proposed Central Mediterranean one, making the case that some of them actually migrated there later on, as well as solving the circumcised Ekwesh problem along the way. This alternative theory behind the collapse was developed by independent researcher Carlos Moreu, whose work will expand upon using archaeological and linguistic evidence. We'll show how geopolitical tensions set the stage for an organized invasion and settlement of a variety of countries in the series of events Moreu calls as the first wave of sea peoples. In the 13th century BC, two leviathans dominated the late Bronze Age world, the Hittite Empire and the Egyptian New Kingdom. Looking to the south, the splendorous Egyptian New Kingdom, born out of the troubles of the 16th century BC, arose in its greatest length in the span of 2 centuries, its influence reaching up to the Taurus mountains of Anatolia. But soon their aggressive expansion was checked by the rising nation of the Hittites, who fixed their borders up to Kadesh near the ancient city of Byblos. Nevertheless, Egypt largely controlled most of the Bronze Age Canaan region, holding its cities under direct vassalage, profiting from imports and exports from the area. Northern Canaan, however, being under direct or indirect vassalage of the Hittites, was even more significant as it intercepted the flow of trade from the Aegean all the way to Babylon, a significant fact we will revisit later. The Hittites established their first kingdom in the 17th century BC, and by the 13th century they have reached the height of their power. Their influence reaching from the Aegean through their troublesome western Anatolian vassals to the once great charioteers but now subjugated Mitanni, by now called Hani-Galbat in western Mesopotamia. The ancient Anatolian Hurrian-speaking kingdom of Mitanni used to be a regional superpower in the mid-15th century BC, in part due to the abundance of copper mines in the region and advanced chariotry. However, due to multi-sided pressure, it was gradually reduced to a frontier zone between the Hittites and the upstart Middle Assyrian kingdom. Starting from the early 14th century BC, the highly bureaucratic and militarized Assyria quickly overran and colonized previous Mitanni territory, directly challenging Hittite authority in the east. In the 1240s, Assyria overran the frontier and fully managed to conquer Hani-Galbat. The first domino has fallen, and the events of the Bronze Age collapse now begin. Around 1220 BC, Tudhalia IV, great king of the Hittites, orders his Amorite vassals to stop the Achaeans, better known as the Mycenaeans, from trading with Assyria. The loss of the former Mitanni copper mines was a huge blow to the overstretched Hittite economy and prestige, forcing them to attack Alashiya, known today as Cyprus, without a doubt with the help of their vassals' ships to seize their copper mines and control trade even more tightly. The lack of Mycenaean pottery in the area during this period further attests to that. Thus the subjugation was a success, albeit temporarily, as this series of actions soon caused another force to invade the island from the west. The seafaring Achaeans, commonly referred to as Mycenaeans, did not take lightly to their lifeline, copper being prohibited from flowing into the nation, as it proved an existential threat to their centralized palace society. The Mycenaeans first came into prominence in the 17th century BC, and by the 13th century they dominated most of the Aegean, largely inheriting the older Minoan civilization's holdings and culture. Authority came from the palaces, the Wanaktora, each one ruled by the Wanax, a term for military leader in Greek. Curiously, more down the hierarchy, the Vasilevs, later a term for king or emperor in ancient Greece and Byzantium, had more of a position of a local chieftain or the head of production groups like artisans or bronze smiths. The Achaeans have gradually displaced the Anatolians and previous Cycladite and Carian populations from most of the islands, and reached to the point of actively influencing Western Anatolia themselves. They even brokered vassalage from the city-state of Bilawanda or Miletos, the old Minoan settlement, turned into an Anatolian metropolis, which they used as a foothold for their operations. Of course, this did not sit well with the Hittites, who constantly attempted to curb Achaean influence in the region, as they held direct vassalage over much of Western Anatolia themselves. With the embargo in place, they aimed to cripple both Assyria and the Greeks, killing two birds with one stone in an attempt to keep holding on to their power in both frontiers. The Greeks also held close ties with some Balkan tribes in a collective we call Phrygians to the north, sharing a similar yet clearly distinct language and culture. The Balkan name of Mopsos appears numerous times in Linear B documents, and a person named Mopsos appears in Hittite texts who raided alongside the Mycenaeans Cyprus in the 14th century BC, further reinforcing the concept of this close relationship between the two nations. With the flow of trade being disrupted, some palaces were directly abandoned as their economy became outright unsustainable, so the Greeks organized for a massive expedition. Hittite strength has been tested previously by the Achaeans. In the previous 2 centuries, at Alashiya, probably Wanax of Mycenae, and the Achaean-backed renegade Piyamaradu, argued by us to be the historical Achilles in another video, wreaked havoc in eastern Mediterranean, proving that with enough motivation, power can be taken away from the Leviathan of Anatolia by the Greeks. The Aegean world was hurting deep from the embargo, and thus a storm was building up in the west, one that the world has never seen before. A diverse collective of peoples lived in western Anatolia, and in the 13th century BC it was finally composed mainly of 2 peoples we know of, Masans of Balkan origin and a culture we call as Luwians. The Luwians were present since 2200 BC in Anatolia, yet shared similarities with Hittite culture and religion, probably both of them adopting elements of the older Hatti peoples. Karkisha or Greek Karia shared some common elements with the old Cycladic peoples, but that remains debated. Southwestern Anatolia in general seems to also share common architectural patterns with the older Minoan civilization as well, perhaps sharing a common ancestral collective or due to possible Minoan settlement in the region. They were vassals of the Hittites for the most part, with Wilusa, Greek Ilion, or better known as Troy, enjoying more freedom as it lay in the outermost edges of Hittite influence and held significant economic strength due to its control of the Black Sea/Aegean trade route. The Luwians were usually victims of Hittite and Achaean ambition and were swayed either way, to either get an advantage over one another or to secure their existence. Although not proven, we can assume a similar embargo of the Achaeans was demanded by the Hittite overlords out of the Libyans, which would hurt their economy as well, as they used to import ceramics and other goods from the Greeks themselves. This world was a living tapestry of interconnected peoples, with examples of artisans traveling to far sides of the world for their services, or through long trade routes with goods reaching either side of the world, with copper and tin of course being the most significant ones, as they could be used to manufacture, amongst many other things, weapons and armor. Free trade had been crucial in that world, and it would soon sunset forever. As mentioned before, the trade embargo imposed by the Hittite Great King and his vassals saw devastating effects in the Mycenaean world, as several settlements were abandoned or destroyed in the period, including Hla and Orchomenos. Yet curiously, nothing happened to the other palaces, leading us to believe that some type of unrest occurred in Greece as a result of the decline in eastern trade, and it was resolved. An organized effort was thus starting to materialize to free the trade routes. A common enemy was blamed, and the collective of Greeks temporarily united and prepared for war in the east. Sounds familiar? A series of short-lived yet impressively populated fortified Mycenaean settlements soon appeared. These include the city of Kastrokefala in Crete and others in southeastern Aegean. Soon later, the Mycenaean Maa-Palaeokastro and Pyla-Kokkinokremos pop up in Cyprus. These projects could be only undergone by people who have supervised similar constructions in the past, not to mention that in order to be properly used, they should have been manned by a significant amount of soldiers. Bathtubs, macaron-type hearths, loom weights, and cyclopean walls, all cultural innovations from Mycenaean Greece, are present in these settlements, making their establishment a deliberate and planned undertaking by its inhabitants, using massive amounts of resources and manpower. A variety of ceramics has also been found in the area, Aegean 3B pottery in large quantities, as well as some of Anatolian origin. Indeed, the Anatolian greyware, which is typical of northwestern Anatolia, is also present in both settlements, but in smaller quantities. Some claim that these centers were built by local Cypriot governors to consolidate power, but that theory does not hold in light of all the foreign evidence and the fact that these were not fortification efforts upon existing settlements, but these were rather entirely new and heavily populated ones at that. Northwestern Anatolia hosted the kingdoms of Wilusa and Seha River Land. Therefore, some people from these areas must have joined the Achaean enterprise in the region, perhaps dissatisfied with the Hittite embargo as well. Achaean and Anatolian settlement does not stop there, however, as during this period, several settlements in the Carmel coast exhibit evidence of their arrival. These include Mycenaean 3B pottery in large quantities. Thanks to modern techniques like neutron activation analysis, it has been proven that these were either made locally in the Levant or Cyprus, and crucially, not imported from Greece. Arrowheads of Mycenaean and Trojan types, and conical caps related to Crete found in Tel Nami, Pythie burials of Anatolian style present in most of those sites, and chamber tombs of Mycenaean type used in Tel Ulfara, all constitute more proof of this people's settlement in the area in the late 13th century, crucially before the Peleshets or Philistines arrived in the area. These settlers must have, however, lived alongside other Canaanite locals as they flourished for a while, with lots of wealth putting in, as evident by the amount of gold, silver, and ivory found in these tombs. Pharaoh Merneptah said he tried to save Pedesha by sending grain in ships, while he also mentions he sent grain to help save the citizens of the land of Ugarit in another text. Clearly, hunger and devastation had plagued the land of the Hittites, caused by the attacks from the Achaeans and their allies. Egypt clearly recognized that their former enemy was a preferred alternative to the upstart rogues who occupy whichever country they see fit, putting in danger their influence in the Near East. These lands belonged to the vassals under the protection of the pharaoh after all, and thus there must have been significant resistance to their settlement. An alliance with the unified Libyan confederation, an eternal thorn in Egypt's side, was formed, and together they would attempt to topple the Egyptian new kingdom for good. The fact that the Libyan chief brought along his family and fortunes in the campaign signifies that this wasn't a mere raid, but rather he probably aimed at establishing his own new dynasty in Egypt. And he could be, of course, more positively predisposed towards the newcomers in the Levant. Unfortunately for him, things didn't go as planned. He would be promptly defeated by the pharaoh, and much of the army would be taken captive. The 5 allies named in the Karnak inscription were the Eqesh, Teresh, Lukka, Sherden, Shekelesh, northerners coming from all lands. The Eqesh, being the most numerous of the allies, are commonly accepted to be the Achaeans without question. The problem with the typical Bronze Age collapse theories is that the Eqesh were circumcised, a practice common in Semitic nations but never in Greece, and therefore this fact remains unexplained. According to Moreu's perspective, since the Achaeans must have settled Canaan, they must have had good relations with the locals, marrying local Canaanite women, like the mostly male Greek colonists did in Kyrene and Massalia later on, and had to adopt the practice to form a type of brotherhood with the Canaanites. This largely solves the problem, especially if we assume that most of the Achaeans were men, as the enterprise lacks evidence of migration and leans more towards colonization and entrenchment. Crucially, they are not depicted anywhere but based on frescoes and vessels around Greece and a fragment of papyrus in Elamarna, possibly representing Mycenaean warriors. We assume that if the Egyptians were to encounter Greek soldiers again, they would depict them a lot differently than the typical sea peoples of the second wave we see later in Medinet Habu. The Teresh must be undoubtedly from the Troad region in Wilusa. As we have seen, Trojan arrows were found in Tel Nami, and northwestern Anatolian ceramics were spotted all over other sites in Canaan. So it is entirely plausible that peoples from the region of Taruisha and Tira have joined the Achaeans in their enterprise, not to mention many of them were circumcised as well, therefore they must have married with the Canaanite locals too. The commonly accepted theory that places their origins in central Mediterranean comes from phonological similarities with the later Etruscans and the Tyrrhenian Sea, but without any further evidence. It is more plausible, however, that these people actually colonized that area after the Bronze Age collapse rather than before, especially considering the discovery of the Limnaean language, which was a branch of the Etruscan language written in archaic Greek script in the Aegean island of Limnos in the 6th century BC. According to Herodotus, a group of Lydians led by Tirsinos sailed first to Limnos and then to the western coast of central Italy, where they migrated in the region of the Umbri. Later historian Dionysius of Halicarnassos tries to disprove Herodotus by claiming Xanthus of Lydia does not mention Tirsinos as a Lydian ruler and does not know of a Lydian migration to Italy. The Lydians, however, were possibly of Masan origin and migrated to the region after the collapse, therefore it makes sense for this information to get lost in their history, but to be remembered by their partners across the sea who didn't go through a similar cultural change. With all this evidence at hand, the northwestern Anatolian origin of the Teresh is undoubted. Everybody accepts that the Lukka were of southwestern Anatolian origin, residing in the later Greek Lycia region, a key strategic position in the then globalized trade. Largely free from Hittite and Greek authority, they also often busied themselves with piracy in the Near East. The Lukka, as well as other Anatolians, were commonly employed as mercenaries in the late Bronze Age world, and they were probably hired for their ships in this Aegean enterprise. Their Anatolian origin is therefore undoubted by anybody. phonological similarities between Sherden and Sardinia and Shekelesh and Sicily, as well as the presence of Cypriot-made ceramics in these regions in the late 12th century BC, has prompted many to believe that these groups originated from the central Mediterranean. However, to accept this theory, we would have to ignore the fact that no evidence of significant seafaring civilization existed in the area before the 12th century. Instead, ceramics and bronze weapons appeared in the area in large quantities after the collapse. According to the recent study, Genetic History from the Middle Neolithic to Present on the Mediterranean island of Sardinia, significant gene flow into Sardinia after the late Bronze Age period has been proven. A striking Eastern Mediterranean ancestry component relative to earlier Sardinian individuals is attested, differentiating the Nuragic peoples from the migrants from the east that populated the island after the collapse. Therefore, we must conclude that these people arrived in central Mediterranean after the waves of destruction in the Near East and Anatolia, and not before. A more proper place of origin seems to be the Luwian kingdom of Seha River Land, which had close ties with the Mycenaeans, as evident in the Maa-Palaeokastro junta letter, for example. The city of Sardis, capital of the Lydians in the Iron Age, points to a possible linguistic connection between the Sherden and the area. Also, ancient Greek historians claimed that the mythical architect Daedalus, who built the labyrinth in Crete, later went on to Sicily and later Sardinia and built impressive edifices called the Dalia. Regardless, since some of these people were circumcised as well as taking into account the presence of northwestern Anatolian practices discussed before in the Near East, during the late 13th century, we have to conclude that both of these people originated in Anatolia, settled in Canaan with the Achaeans, and then attacked Egypt alongside them to consolidate their power in the area. After these events, something must have forced them alongside the Teresh to abandon their settlements and settle in Italy and the surrounding islands. Nevertheless, this diverse coalition was defeated by Pharaoh Merneptah, and Cyprus would be recaptured around the same time by Shupililiuma II, the last king of the Hittites. The Achaeans, however, have proven that they were more than capable in hurting the two superpowers. Seeing that copper still did not flow into the Aegean, they have decided to take a more direct action. An alliance with the Mushki, a tribe from the Phrygian collective, was formed, and together they would attempt to destroy Hittite hegemony in Anatolia altogether. The local Luwians and Hittites would witness their country turn into ruins, and would migrate outside their homeland, forming the Kingdom of Palestine or Walistan in Syria. Many settled in Canaan like the Philistines, others in Libya, and others settled in Sardinia, Sicily, and mainland Italy. The invasion of Anatolia and the migration and the wars of these displaced peoples with Ramses III, namely the second wave of Sea Peoples, will be analysed in the second part of this Bronze Age collapse series, so stay tuned to not miss out. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and the world would soon witness the wrath of the Mycenaeans. The old world would soon perish forever, as Bronze Age collapse was now in full swing.